Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24, bringing you a game of the day from the Tata Steel Masters 2019, the super tournament in Wijk in Holland, where round number 10 was played, and round number 10 was one of the most action-packed we've seen yet, with many deserving games. Peter Svidler will cover the clash between the leaders, Vishy Anand with the black pieces against world champion Magnus Carlsen, and I have decided to cover the game involving the other tournament leader before this round, Mr. Ian Nepomniachtchi, who has the black pieces against the local hero, 19-year-old Jorden van Foreest from Holland. Jorden has been doing better in the tournament recently after starting with 1 out of 5. He's won another game and made 2 draws. He's now at 3 points out of 9 and has the white pieces against Nepomniachtchi. Another tough task because, of course, he is outrated every day. Let's jump into the game. Van Foreest with the white pieces starts with the move 1e4, as he does pretty much exclusively. And this time around, Nepomniachtchi decides to go for his main weapon, the Najdorf. In round number 1, he defeated the other Dutchman, Anish Giri, by playing the Pierts. But today he feels like playing his main opening. Knight f3, d6. We get the knight of starting position after a6. And Van Foreest decides to deviate from his usual move in this position. He normally plays bishop to e2, but for this tournament it seems like he's prepared an even more topical line, the move pawn to h3. Looks slow and a bit random, but we've seen in many Sicilians that preparing g2 to g4 ASAP has become a priority for white. So there's move h3 nowadays, together with bishop g5, I would say, has absolute mainline status against the Najdorf. Black faces a choice. He can play e6, which is met by g4. That has its own body of theory. g6, intending to fianchetto the bishop, is also a legitimate move. But Nepomniachtchi plays the main move and the most Najdorfy move, e7 to e5, chasing this knight away from the center. The main move in this position is knight de2, intending to follow up with g4 and knight to g3 in many lines. But Jorden in this game decides to put his knight on b3, which is also a natural move, a bit of a sideline, but still very critical. White wants to push on the king side with either f4 or g4 and put pressure on the black center / king side, the knight on f6. Nepomniachtchi plays the move bishop to e6, which I think is the main move here as well. I should mention that I'm not a big specialist on the Najdorf from either color, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But I do know that after the move f4 played in the game, the reply by Nepomniachtchi cannot be good. He plays the move e takes f4, but that allows the white bishop to recapture on f4 in one go, and that more or less leaves white tempo up compared to another theoretical line. And to spend a tempo in the Najdorf is a risky endeavor from the black side. I'll show you the difference between this position and the other theoretical position by putting the move 6 bishop e3, another main line, on the board. Here black can go e5, knight to b3, bishop to e6, and this position where most people play f3. f4 is also very much a move, and if black plays e takes f4 here, bishop takes f4, we get the same position as we got in the game, but with the pawn still on h2, while in our game it's on h3. Now this might not look like a giant difference, but it does matter very much, especially for the plan chosen in the game, because after knight to c6 as played, Van Foreest plays queen to e2, intending to castle queenside, which he does after bishop to e7. Long castles, and we can see this pawn on h3 is tremendously useful. It stops black from going bishop g4, which would pick up the exchange here, and it also prepares the move that white wants to play anyway, g2 to g4, in order to chase this knight away from the f6 square and initiate a pawn storm against the very likely future home of the black king. So this position is already sort of dubious for black, and I'm not sure why Nepomniachtchi went for it. Could be that he mixed up the move order, which often happens, there's so much theory out there, or it could be that he just wanted to take Jorden van Foreest out of book. Also a common strategy when you're 150 points higher rated against an outsider to make him think on his own. But this position is also easier to play for white because the plan to play g4 and g5 is fairly obvious. So I don't think we can call Nepomniachtchi's opening a success, neither theoretically nor practically. For now, e4, e5 is threatened, so black has to get out of the way with the queen. And white plays the natural move g4, short castles, g5, knight to d7. And we have a sort of typical structure for these lines, which at first sight doesn't look so bad for black. One of the knights will sit very pretty on e5, the bishop on e6 looks good. Black has the plan to play b5, initiate action on the queen side as well. But it turns out that, first of all, the white king is pretty safe here. It takes forever to pose a threat. If you go b5 and b4, this knight will just jump into the juicy d5 square. While the white position is also much easier to play. You can just push your h-pawn up the board, then operate with threats like g5 to g6, also bishop to h3 to undermine this bishop. So all in all, not a great position for black. And Van Foreest could have played the very direct move h3 to h4 here, but instead he decides to first regroup his queen with queen to e3, which was not strictly necessary, but the queen is headed for g3, which is a nice square in these structures, putting pressure on d6 and supporting the pawn push h4 and h5. Rook ac8 is played, met with another typical sort of prophylactic move, king to b1. This mainly makes sure that if there ever is a black queen landing on c2, it's no longer checkmate, but the king has a square in the corner. Of course, you don't really want a queen coming to c2, but king b1, an all-around useful move, stopping black tactical chances like, I don't know, just to give an example, h4, knight to b4. This, of course, wouldn't happen, but here, this move would be sort of bad news. Well, with the king on b1. Not really happening. So king to b1, rook f to e8, another standard move. At least clearing the f8 square for the bishop if it's needed, and staring down the white queen on the e file. So the queen, after h4, b5, decides to go to the g3 square, attacking the d6 pawn. So far, very natural moves from both sides. Black doesn't want to give this pawn, so he reacts by putting this knight on e5. You typically want the c6 knight and not the d7 knight in such positions, because after knight d5 is very awkward to meet bishop d5 ed. This knight doesn't really have a good square. The black position is just fairly terrible here. So knight c to e5. The drawback knight c to e5 has is it loses control over the d4 square, and this knight very happily returns to d4, which not only puts some pressure on the bishop on e6, but more importantly also covers the c2 pawn, so that now if black plays b4, you can once again just play knight d5, bishop d5 ed. c2 is defended, and the black position is pretty ugly. This knight has access to these squares, h5, g6 is coming, and so on and so forth. So no time for b4 yet. You first have to cover the d5 square, which Nepomniachtchi does by playing knight to b6. Van Foreest plays bishop to h3, also very natural, exchanging the strong bishop on e6. There's nothing better than bishop takes h3, queen takes, and we see that the white position remains fairly pleasant and easy to play. You want to go h5, then g6 at the right moment. If this knight is being questioned, it can always jump to d5. This knight has a nice square on f5. The white king is somewhat safer, so still not a great position for Nepomniachtchi, who does his best to create some threats on the queen side by playing knight e to c4. Now if white is careless, plays let's say h5, then you run into a little tactic. Knight takes b2, king takes b2, and queen takes c3. Black wins because after queen takes c3, knight a4 check recovers the material with quite some interest. Of course, this does not really happen at this level. Van Foreest plays the best move. He goes knight to d5, eliminating all tricks against it by exchanging it. Knight takes d5, e takes d5. The structure undergoes another transformation. This construction looks very powerful because this knight gains access to the c6 square as well. But mainly it was about parrying black's threats on the queen side here in order to get a free hand on the king side, where h5 followed by g6, or sometimes even the immediate g6, are very much on the table. Nepomniachtchi has to find a new way to create counterplay. and he finds a fresh target by playing knight to b6, attacking this pawn on d5. And here Jorden van Foreest displays very good understanding of the position by not trying to defend this pawn, but instead just pursuing his agenda on the king side. He could have started with h5, but he starts with bishop to c1, which comes down to the same thing. The bishop gets out of the way so that after knight takes d5, it's not being attacked. And white proceeds with h4, h5, correctly arguing that his initiative is more important than the pawn that black gained here. This is a tough position to play for black. It's hard to suggest a good move. Nepomniachtchi plays probably the most natural move, bishop f8, vacating the e-file and covering g7 in case the white attack gains any steam here. This move does have the drawback, however, that now g6 is going to happen, and this bishop can no longer occupy the f6 square, which it would very much like to go to. It's much more active than f8 in case of g5, g6. It's hard to suggest a good waiting move, though. I looked at queen to c4, which the computer suggests. But now white doesn't have to play g6 and run into bishop f6. He can just strengthen his position further. One move I like is rook to h2, overprotecting the c2 pawn, so the knight can jump into action. And if black does nothing, I don't know, let's say a5, then white could improve his position even further by putting the rook on f2. Or he could say, okay, the time for action has come, g6, bishop f6, knight f5, which is also very awkward for black to meet. So there was no great solution. Nepomniachtchi does play the move bishop to f8. Van Foreest plays g6, putting pressure on the black king side. There is really nothing better here than playing h7 to h6. If you wait, white always has the option to open all the files on the king side by pushing h5 to h6 himself, or he could just start questioning this f7 pawn with moves like rook f1, asking black to open the position, which would not be great. So h6 played, and here white faces a choice. I quite like the move that he played, the move queen to g2. It's a nice multi-purpose move, attacking the knight, occupying the g-file, preparing for some tactics here. Some bishop takes h6, followed by g takes f7, discover check will become a theme, and at the same time covering the c2 pawn. The computer is not that high on this move, even though we'll come to this in a minute. I sort of disagree with it. The computer says that queen to f5 was an even better choice. His point is that now knight to e3 does not work, because after g takes f7, queen takes f7, bishop takes e3, black lose material, because from f5 the queen controls the c8 square and could pick up this rook. So queen f5 was a serious option. I'm not convinced it was better than queen g2. Black plays queen b7, and there is no immediate win apparent for white, but it was a very decent choice. The reason the computer dislikes this queen g2 move is that black has the option to play knight to e3, which was not played in the game, but it was probably the best choice. However, after bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, you can see by the engine bar the computer now says it's equal. I dare to disagree with this assessment, because this bishop on f8 is still incredibly passive, and after rook hf1 the black position remains very, very unpleasant. The best you can do here is play the move f7 to f6, trying to keep the position close. But if you analyze a bit further, let's say rook f to e1, now that the structure is clarified on the king side, turns out that black is still facing an uphill struggle. The knight has this f5 square. One sample line, for example, rook e5 takes de. Looks fine for black at first sight. He has 4 versus 2 on the king side, but these pawns aren't really going anywhere, while this white construction makes sure the king will always be extremely vulnerable on the back rank. And it turns out that even endgames are bad for black. For example, queen c4, queen d5 check, takes. And there's just nothing black can do to free himself. Well, white has a completely free hand, will centralize his king, and then start working on the queen side to build a passed pawn a4, or attack the a7 pawn. So if we keep looking a bit, it turns out that queen g2 really did not spoil the white advantage, but instead was a very nice move. Nepomniachtchi did not fancy his chances after this knight e3, understandably, and instead decides to go back with the knight to f6. But that allows the first of 2 tactical blows that we will see in this game, and there are reasons why I chose it. I've sort of telegraphed it already. It is the move bishop takes h6. Now that the queen is on the g file, this works tactically because g takes h is met by a sequence of checks that just decide the game. G takes f7 double check, forces king f7, queen g6 check, king e7, rook h e1 check, and the black position crumbles. For example, king d7. There's many ways to win here, but this is one fairly clean solution. Rook e1 check. And the end is near. Bishop e7, queen f6 wins, and king to d8 runs into knight e6, picking up the queen. So the bishop on h6 could not be touched. Instead, Nepomniachtchi tries to defend by playing f takes g6, arguing, if you play hg now I can play g takes h6, take your bishop. You no longer have this as cover check. Well, if you play queen takes g6, then black can bring his queen closer to the action by going queen f7. Even endgames would be somewhat more pleasant for white after, let's say, bishop c1, but black would have decent chances to defend. So Van Foreest correctly tries to find something better. And he goes for the move rook d to f1, which is a decent move, keeps the pressure up. But it's not the most precise solution here. That was very hard to find though. Not the first move, bishop to g5. I think that's a move you consider. Stopping g takes h5, bishop takes f6. But the point is that after knight takes h5, you have to spot the very strange move. That now you move the bishop again and you go bishop to c1. It turns out that black can't defend his kingside. Pawn on g6 is hanging. If you go queen to f7, white goes rook d f1, chases this queen away, and the queen can't really keep contact with the g6 pawn. Let's say queen to c4, queen g6. White just wins by opening all the files on the king side, while knight to f6 would lead to disaster on the h file. Queen h8, checkmate. Pretty unpleasant threat here. So bishop g5 was the correct way to play, but this bishop g5 followed by bishop c1 sequence, not easy at all. Maybe you consider bishop c1 immediately, but then black has g takes h5, and there is no immediate breakthrough. So Van Foreest played rook d to f1, logical move directly against g takes h6, and also introducing the idea, which we'll see in a minute after black's queen to c4. This is the best chance. White captures on f6, nevertheless, because black can't really recapture gf, leads to checkmate. Queen g6, king h8. Bishop takes f8, threatens queen g7, and after rook f8, we have another devastating series of checks that end the king's journey. Queen g7, king e8, rook e1 check, king d8, and queen e7 is checkmate. Now, of course, Nepomniachtchi has not missed this, but he has planned to meet rook takes f6 with queen takes d4, the only move, after which the position sort of calms down a little. White plays rook g6. One nice side effect of this is that now white finally won his pawn back, which he sacrificed a while ago. We have equal material, and just by looking at the position we can tell the white king is still perfectly safe, while the black king is still under a lot of fire. You start worrying about ideas like bishop takes g7 followed by h6, or just this bishop going out of the way and then h6, opening all the floodgates. One thing if black plays a neutral move, let's say b4, that white should not get is too overzealous here to finish the game, because if you went bishop takes g7, first line looks pretty strong, bishop takes g7, h6, tending to go rook g7 or hg7, turns out that black has a fairly reliable defensive resource in form of queen takes b2 checkmate, which I'm sure Jorden has, but would not be impossible to forget about from afar. Instead after b4, what white should do is, what I already mentioned, put the bishop back on c1, prepare h6, and remain in the driver's seat. Alternative, maybe an even smarter alternative, would be to first go rook to g4, stopping black from playing queen e4, and then if the queen goes somewhere. Now we go bishop c1. Once again, h6 is looming. Nepomniachtchi instead plays a more human move. He plays, king to h7 instead of b5, b4, getting out of this g file so he no longer is pinned and has to worry about direct tactics. His point is after king h7, white plays the mass move. His bishop goes away, bishop to c1, that he wants to simplify the position by playing queen to e4. And if the queens were to be exchanged, white would still be somewhat better, but black has fairly decent chances to save the game. But it turns out that white doesn't have to exchange the queens, or he can do it on his own terms. And if you guys are in the mood for a little tactics exercise, you can pause the video now and try to figure out how white wins in this position, which is pretty nice. The solution is pawn to h6. And of course this is a move you consider, but it involves quite a bit of calculating, because you allow the move queen takes g6, and you also allow queen takes g2. And both these lines have very different refutations, and you have to calculate fairly carefully till the end. Let's start with queen takes g2. This was not played in the game. Black did take on g6, and see how white wins here. Starts with h takes g7, discover check. Queen would not be great because of g8 queen checkmate. So black has to capture the rook on g6, king takes g6. White queens his pawn. The bishop has to step in to avoid queen takes g2, bishop g7. And here white had to calculate from afar that he is winning in this position, which is doable, but still required quite some thinking. The winning move, the only winning move everything loses, is rook h6 check, forcing the king on an unfortunate journey. King to f5, queen f7 check, king to e4, queen f4 check, king to d5, rook takes d6, king to c5, and the trip is over after b4 checkmate. That's one line that black had to calculate, and of course Nepomniachtchi also spotted this doesn't work, so he goes for the alternative, queen takes g6. The first move is easy, h takes g7 check, king takes g7, bishop h6, also fairly forced. And the black king has to go to f7. King h7 would allow bishop takes f8 with a final discovered check. So king f7, king f6 doesn't help because it would run into rook f1 check just as in the game. King f7, rook f1. Now the king cannot stay in touch with the queen. So in order not to lose the queen for nothing, you have to go queen to 6, hoping that white takes it such a position black would have two rooks for the queen, and his drawing chances would be very much intact. White probably remains somewhat better because the black king is so weak, but here black has very decent chances. But instead Van Foreest has spotted that he can give a very nasty check here, queen d5 check, which forces black to give up the queen for less material, because nothing really works. Rook e6 comes to mind, but that allows rook f6, king f6, bishop g5 check, king f7, and queen f5 check. And now this rook falls, white wins. So rook e6 not an option. King g6 is the move that required the most precision, at least calculating from afar, because you have to see here that you win after rook to g1 check. You ignore the queen, give another check, but it turns out that black is being mated on the g and h files, no matter what he does. King h6, queen h1, and mate next move. And king h7, queen g8 check, king h6, rook h1, and once again, the mate is coming next move. So both players must have seen all of this, and therefore Nepomniachtchi plays the move king to e7, still trying to keep the king in contact with his queen without allowing this lethal rook g1 check. But here, white is once again not forced to take, but he can play bishop to g5, exchanging the queen not for the rook, but instead for the bishop. And after queen takes g5, Van Foreest gives a little Zwischenschach, rook f7 check, king d8, queen takes g5 check. The situation clears up, and it turns out that white is completely winning. b7, you have a queen for a rook and a bishop, and the black king is much, much weaker than the white king. Well, these pawns on b5 and especially a6, well, first a6, then b5, are excellent targets for the black queen. Has to be said that Van Foreest's technique is far from perfect in the moves to come. Queen d5, rook g8, a3, this is fine, making a king and cashing in on the fact that black cannot yet take the c2 pawn, because if he tries rook g1 check, this was played, king a2. If he tries to capture here, he runs into yet another little tactic. Queen to e4. Takes this guy and this guy. Rook c7, only move. And here, cute way to finish the game is rook takes e7. Rook takes e7, queen a8 check. King d7, queen a7 and all of a sudden it's the rook on g1 that falls because of the double attack. Black loses. So after king a2, black could not take this pawn just yet, played rook to e1, coordinating his pieces to the extent that he can. The rook defends the bishop on e7, also controls the e5 square. And here is where Van Foreest could have saved himself a lot of work by just playing c2 to c3. Keeping his pawn structure intact, not allowing black to activate his rook on c8 when, yeah, the end really is a question of time. White just goes queen b7, picks up this pawn on a6, then eventually either wins the pawn on b5 or creates a passed pawn on the b or a file. And the game is very much over. Instead, Jorn played queen to b7, and after rook to c2, rook takes c2. White is still winning, but all of a sudden it requires work and calculating variations because the material balance here is not that clear of a win anymore. Black, for now, can defend his b5 pawn, and White really could have had the same position with a pawn on c3. But the way it is, he has to generate an attack against the black king and then try to combine that with threats against the b5 pawn in order to win the game. So he made himself work quite a bit more. The following moves, yeah, aren't completely forced. Black is still in big trouble. You can see the engine evaluation doesn't really change. He just thinks it's completely winning. But practically things weren't that simple anymore. You have to find a way to break down black's defenses. Rook f8, bishop g7, check, queen to b8, some probing. Rook to g8, king to e6, queen e8 check, and now White has made some progress. Check, queen to g6 would overstretch the black defenses. Let's say queen g6, bishop f6, rook f8. And sooner or later, something's gonna give. So instead, Nepomniachtchi chooses to centralize his king. But this king is a very welcome target for the white heavy artillery. And I like the next move, queen to e2. Very quietly, keeping an eye on the b5 pawn, preparing rook to b8, trying to overload this guy, while making sure black never gets any activity with rook to c2, because then b5 drops with check. The game continues, bishop e5, rook to b8, king c6. Van Foreest is still looking for a way to finish it. Queen d3 targets his pawn again, king to c6, and now he's found the right mechanism, as indicated by his next move. He plays queen to f3 check. And the point is that if black once again goes king to d7, now white picks up this pawn with checks. He goes queen f7, king c6, queen e8, and after king d5 we just take on b5, which would be an easy win with the two passed pawns. Well, if black goes rook to d7, he's self-pinned, and after rook d8, this rook falls. After queen f3 check, black has to give up his fairly solid construction with his pawn on d6, covering e5 and c5, and also giving the king shelter along the 6th rank. Now that this bishop has become vulnerable, Van Foreest immediately finds into the black. That's not a fortress, but what remains of the black camp. By playing queen to h5, targets his bishop, pawn to d4, and queen g6 check finally achieves the goal of overstretching the black defense. If king d5, rook d8, the king can no longer return. Well, on c4, it would not last very long. Queen c2 is checkmate. So instead, black has to go bishop to d6, and here the move queen e4 check literally ends the game, because Nepomniachtchi resigns. The point where he resigns is that king d7 is met by queen e8 checkmate, while if he were to step into the pin, playing rook to d5, white has the not very complicated shot of playing rook takes b5. Black has nothing better than king takes b5, check, takes the bishop, bishop take, bishop to c5, and pawn to b4. Wins this bishop, and yeah, no point to continue playing here. Such a position with queen and a pawn versus rook is not exactly a fair fight. So Nepomniachtchi resigns after queen e4 check, and that of course means a big victory for Jorden van Foreest, who scores his 3rd win in this tournament. He's also lost 5 games, but still 3 wins against his world-class opposition is fairly impressive, and also changes the tournament situation. Nepomniachtchi was one of the co-leaders before the game, and clearly losing this game does not help his chances. We'll have a look at the standings if you don't want to know, because you don't want spoilers for what happened in other games. Switch this video off now. because here are the standings after round number 10. And they show that the world champion is back on top with 7 points out of 10 games, because he managed to defeat Vishy Anand in a game that will be analyzed by Peter Svidler on this very channel. Anish Giri also won his game with the black pieces. That means his 4th victory with the black pieces, which is another rarity at this level, is now in sole 2nd place, half a point behind Magnus Carlsen with 6.5 out of 10. Nepomniachtchi, after his loss, shares the 3rd to 5th place with Ding Liren and Vishy Anand, and no one else has more than 50%. So the tournament winner will be one of these 5 players, now the world champion, of course, in pole position. Jorden van Foreest on 4 out of 10, very respectable, is winning 10 rating points in this field, and very surprisingly is 1.5 points ahead of his next round opponent, Vladimir Kramnik, who does not have a great tournament, to put it mildly. That was my game of the day. I hope you guys liked it. Thanks for watching. We will be back with the live commentary in round number 11. So see you there on Chess24 or in another highlight video. Thanks for watching.